Hello everyone, this is Ed Densel, host of Unfound. I wonder if you will consider becoming a supporter of this YouTube channel. By pressing the join button below, you can receive, for just 10 cents a day, the video version of the podcast a day early, the Unfound Now episodes a week early, daily video updates from yours truly, and cool emojis to use during the Monday night live show. Please consider it as you watch the following spectacular video. Thanks.
Marc James Warren Allen II was a 13-year-old from Des Moines, Iowa. He was in the Boy Scouts and delivered newspapers. On the evening of March 29, 1986, the day before Easter, Marc said he was going to a friend's a few blocks away, although Marc never said who the friend was. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. Despite having now featured about 270 disappearances, Unfound has only covered a few which can obviously be connected to other disappearances or even other murders. What are they? Jeremy Burt and Aaron Barnard from Boise, Idaho. There are many reasons to believe their cases are connected, with them knowing women who were best friends. Debbie Lowe. She was almost surely murdered by the serial killer Gerard Schaefer on her walk to school on February 29, 1972. Why? Well, Gerard just happened to be friends with her parents. He has been connected to the murder of at least 2 other girls, and the number goes as high as 26, if you want to believe that. Andrea Bowman. We know her father, Dennis Bowman, killed a woman in 1980. And many people, including myself, believe he killed other women. Most recently, Unfound covered the disappearances of Jackie Cooper and Mary Watkins, who were surely murdered by James Tolliver, a man who almost assuredly killed 3 other women, including his wife. So the podcast has experience in this area. But statistically, these kinds of cases are just a small percentage of Unfound's overall catalog. Well, with Marc Allen, I challenge you to try to figure out if his disappearance is connected to 2 boys who went missing just a few years before. Are they 3 of a kind? And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Linus' website, CHARLEYproject.org. Marc Allen was pretty much your typical 13-year-old. He had an older sister and a younger brother. Marc lived with his mother, although he hadn't been in the Des Moines area for that long, having spent some time in Minnesota with his father. He was involved in most things that would have interested boys in the 1980s, and Marc was a good student, although media accounts over the years have documented that he might have had some behavior issues. But what normal 13-year-old boy doesn't? Most importantly, Marc never made any mention that anybody, child or adult, was bothering him before he disappeared. So on March 29, 1986, the day before Easter, the rest of Marc's family went to a nearby amusement park while he stayed at home. Nobody knows what he did during this time. However, when they got home, Marc was there. Within that next hour, Marc stated he would be walking to a friend's house on McKinley Street and that he would be back soon, telling his mother to save him some pizza. Importantly, Marc never stated who the friend was. He was never seen again. Despite there being disappearances of boys like Marc in the preceding years, police were not quick to act. And even when they did, nobody in the neighborhood recalled seeing Marc on the streets that evening or night. In my summation, I will be going over the general facts of two other disappearances of boys from Des Moines in 1982 and 1984, Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin, respectively, that could be connected to Marc's. However, for now and during the interview, I want you to concentrate on these three questions for Marc's case exclusively. Number one, given that Marc seemingly never stated specifically where he was going, should we doubt his story? Number two, if Marc told the truth about going to see a friend on McKinley Street, why is it that 36 years later that friend has never come forward? And number three, could the key to unlocking the mystery of Marc's disappearance be figuring out the identity of a young man who lived under the same roof as Marc and his family at another house during the preceding year? Marc's family believes he was certainly abducted by someone and that he did not run off all on his own. The guest for this episode is Marc's younger brother, Chris Allen. Unfound news. I've received a request to speak at another university in November. This will be a new school, and I have to thank a longtime friend from college for facilitating it. I will give you more details once we get closer to the date. I can tell you this. It will be in Ohio. Next, it's the end of the month, so you should be looking for both the next Unfound Now and the November newsletter within the next couple of weeks. That is, if you're subscribed to both. If not, go to the YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button. And for the newsletter, email me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll put you on the list. Finally, for the 7th straight year for Halloween, I will be dressing up as a podcaster.
Where you can find Unfound on these following podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and many others, especially outside the United States. The new podcast, Unfound Live, which comes out on Tuesdays, can also be found on these platforms. Social media sites: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and the newest one, TikTok. Listener support sites: patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. The website, theunfoundpodcast.com. The email address, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you.
So happy to have on this episode of Unfound the younger brother of Marc Allen, Chris Allen. Chris, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good to talk to you. And you're coming to us from Iowa, correct?
Yep. Ankeny, Iowa. Just a suburb. Right.
Fantastic. All right. Let's start here. You are Marc's younger brother. My understanding is you were 10 years old when he went missing, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's just talk about your family in the mid-1980s. How many children? How many people under the same roof? How would you describe the Allen family of the mid-1980s?
Well, at that particular time, my brother Jamie was living with us. So it was myself, my mom, my sister Nikki, our sister Nikki,
okay,
and then my stepfather now, Jerry. He was kind of not living, but in and out enough that he was there. So, so yeah, we all lived there under the same roof and on Emma.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what were the ages, if you can maybe just approximate it? Of course, we know what Marc's age was. We know what your age was. What about these other siblings? How old were they?
Well, my sister was, she would have been 16 because there's 3 years between, Marc and myself and Marc and my older sister. So
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That was the only siblings. Jerry was someone my mom was dating, so it was just the three
Okay.
of us.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Understood. So, of course, this time of the year, what was going on? What do you remember about? Do you remember anything specifically about 1986 before this all happened? What were you doing? Your mother, your mother working? What was the usual kind of like pattern for everybody in the house?
Yeah. So my mom, she was a bartender, and she worked at a couple places. There was a bar called Post Tap and Donna's Lounge and Barry's Lounge. So she would work different days, different nights there. My stepdad worked construction, so he was doing that during the daytime and was off on the weekends. Uh, that particular time of year, my sister, I'm sorry, yeah, my sister was kind of living with her dad, but would come and stay, periodically because she lives in Colfax, and that's only like 35 minutes away from us. Um,
So it's, of course, this is early 1986, and then you were coming up on Easter. What was going on? I think you said that your mother was a bartender, and I guess you were going to school at the time. What grade were you in? What grade was Mark in?
yeah, so at 10, I guess I would have been third grade,
Mhm.
and I think that's what I would have been in third
Yeah.
or fourth. He was in, I want to say, sixth or seventh.
Okay.
So
Okay.
he was going to a school called Brody, and I was going to a school called Wright Elementary. It was actually just about 3 blocks from where we lived.
Mhm.
But that particular, time, I would spend a lot of time with my friends. Back in that day, everybody just walked up and down the street and hung out, rode bikes. Just curfew was when the lights came on, and
Yep.
um, usually if somebody needed to come home, parents just go to the door and yell, and you'd hear them like, "Oh, I go home." Um,
Yeah.
but again, on that particular day, a friend of mine, we went to Adventureland. That's an amusement park out here. Spent the day there. Came back home, and we ended up playing, hide and seek and different things over at his house. He lived literally just across the street from me. So we did that until the late night. And, um, you know, I didn't find out till later that, my brother had decided to go see somebody, a friend, which I didn't think anything of at the time because that wasn't abnormal for, either one of us to go places.
So
And
what you're saying is this was the day that he disappeared was a Saturday.
yes, yep, it was that
Okay.
Saturday.
All right. And when you talk about, man, this once again, this is being that most people probably in the audience have not been to Des Moines and certainly not been maybe to your particular street. But when you say your friends and you went to Adventureland, a lot of friends in that neighborhood, or were they kind of spread out, or were like your friends like two doors away across the street? And maybe with Mark's friends as well, were they all clustered in one spot or kind of more spread out?
Well, my friends were all on my street, which was Emma. So the friend that I spent the day with, because it was just one friend,
Hmm.
he literally across the street from me. Just like you'd walk out to the street from my house and walk across the street, and there's his house. And then
Wow.
I had a couple of friends that lived, halfway up the street. So maybe like a 5 minute walk from
Mhm.
my house to theirs. Um, he had some friends that lived on that street as well that were like within the 5 minute walk up the street. And
Okay.
then, I didn't really know his friends too much. I mean, he'd usually go to their house,
Yeah.
not the other way around.
Okay.
So, but to my knowledge, all of his friends were, just within walking distance, between 5 and 15 minutes.
Okay. So in not knowing, once again, your difference of 3 years, and 3 years at that age, I mean, there's a world of difference between a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. Even like
Right.
from a 14 to a an 11-year-old. Whereas you start getting late, difference between a 20-year-old and 17-year-old, of course, the difference maybe isn't as much as far as physicality, but certainly at that time, 13 to 10, big difference. And he's going to a different school. You're going to a different school. Am I then to understand maybe his friends didn't maybe come over to your house that much? Maybe that's one of the reasons that you didn't know
No.
them that well.
Yeah, no, our friends didn't really come over to our house too much because we just had a small house. We just usually go over there and hang out, either in their backyards or in their house. That was a lot of what we did when we hung out back then. We just played outside in the backyard, you know.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm just a few years older than you are. If you were 10 in 86, I was actually 16 in 86. I'm about 6 years older than you are. So yeah, I remember that, even though I was in Pennsylvania. So that day, of course, you specifically remember that day. Is this Adventureland someplace that you could walk to, or did you need to take a bus, get a ride?
Our parents would have to take us. It was a good, 30 minutes away. So we lived in Des Moines, and Adventureland is in Altoona. So yeah, this is a good, 20 to 30 minute drive. So my parents my mom had taken us out there, and if I remember correctly, she and my stepdad were there too. So I think it was all of us, except for my brother. I think he'd just been kind of hanging out at home or with his friends or whatever. And then, when we had gotten home I don't know, it was about 8 o'clock, because usually it closed up around 8 or 9. So about the time it was getting dark.
Yeah.
Do
you remember who picked you up that day?
I don't think anybody picked us up. I think we went and spent the day with my mom. My mom was there with.
Oh, she was with you at Adventureland.
Yeah, so I just invited her for this.
Great. Fantastic. Okay. And so, once again, you're then understanding, I realize you were 10 at the time. So you go with your mother and a friend. Who then would have been left at the house that day with Mark?
At 13, nobody would have been left with him,
Nobody.
I mean, the age where, you were pretty well enough to take care of yourself. I mean, there wasn't any concerns or worries.
Okay. And so your sister wasn't there, and your stepfather wasn't there either.
No, I'm pretty sure he was with us.
Oh, he was with you at Adventureland.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so you're out there, and I guess you're all expecting then to come home later that day, and Mark would be there, I suppose.
Yeah, and he was. He was. Yeah, we came home, like I said, it was probably just after dark, so it would have been 8 or 8:30. And then, like I said, when we got home, that was when I went over to my friend's house across the street. And then that's when, somewhere not long after that, he had told my mom he was going to go see a friend, and had asked her to get pizza because we had pizza for dinner, because he was going to want to get some, eat some when he got back.
Okay. Now I have to ask, once again, the listeners know, I know you don't know me very well, Chris, but the listeners who've been with Unfound for 6 years know that I'm not a parent. I don't have any kids. I've never been married. But of course, I was a child at one time. I was 13, of course, at one time. And maybe I just have to ask, maybe to represent the audience of parents, that it might seem odd that on a Saturday night, you're getting home at 8:30, that after dark in March, that it would seem like, okay, this 13-year-old is going to be, quote unquote, allowed to go walk somewhere after dark on a Saturday night at what might be considered, even though it is a weekend, a late hour. Is there anything, I know you are a parent, anything that you can say about that? Did it seem odd at the time? Does it seem odd now? What do you think?
I mean, this time and age, after everything I've been through, my kids don't alone. They never have. But I'm the brother of an abductee, so I think. But back then, there wasn't a bunch of talk about abductees. I mean, people just trusted.
Okay.
I mean,
sure.
It was around the decade when, abductions and kidnappings really came to a forefront. So, yeah, no, it wasn't out of the ordinary for kids to do that. I mean, my friends would walk to my house, or I'd walk over to my friend's house, after dark. Nobody thought anything of it.
Okay. All right, so it's 8:30. Once again, I realize you were 10 years old. You were not like 25 at the time, so some of these memories maybe, not exact. And of course, there is the trauma that goes along with that. But the way you understand it, it's after dark, and he says that he's going somewhere. We'll get into the more of the specifics of that. But just to ask you some questions, and I realize it's been 36 years now. Anything that you can remember about the time that Mark ever talked about, thought he was being followed, that anybody like strange kind of came to the house knocking on the door looking for him? Anything in your memory regarding any of that before, of course, he went missing?
No, none of that.
Okay.
The only thing that the only person I ever had a thought of is, prior to us living there, I should say we were always living there, but there was a period of time where my mom was living with a friend of hers, and she'd been in a bad relationship, and she just wanted somebody to be there with her. Well, she had a younger man living with her,
Huh.
and my brother had taken a real liking to him, and they had spent some time together, and that would be that could honestly be my only suspicion of somebody that might be involved, because other than friends, he didn't know anybody else other than my mom and my stepdad.
Okay.
Pretty.
Do you know where this guy? And we don't need to get into his name, but how long before Mark went missing did he move out? And do you know where he went?
Well, Mark didn't. The guy didn't move out. We did.
Oh, you did. Oh, I see. I got it. You
Yeah.
moved. All right. And so, how far away did you end up moving away from him?
Well, she lived probably about 3 miles from where we lived.
Okay.
But I mean, it was literally, Emma was off of a street called Southwest 9th, and literally you could take Southwest 9th south for about 3 miles, and then I think, right or went west for a little ways, and that's where that house was. So it wasn't like it'd been super hard,
Okay.
to get from one to the other. And I mean, who knows?
Okay. All right. So you were living with this guy at one point. Your mother was friends with him. Then you move out. You move into the house from
No,
which.
we weren't friends with him. No,
Oh,
my living with her friend. We were living with my mom's friend.
okay.
This renting a room in her house.
Oh, okay. So
So
you're
she
all.
had
So that sounds like a pretty big house there, Chris.
yeah, it was.
Okay.
It was.
Gotcha. All right. So just so we can go through this again, your mother is living in a house with her friend, and there's another guy living there.
A young man. Yeah, he was like
That's yeah.
18.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha. And
It,
Mark seemed to get along well with this guy.
yeah, but this was prior to us moving back home. This is
Yes.
prior to this. It's two separate houses.
Yes, I gotcha.
Okay.
I gotcha. All right. And then you moved out and got your own house.
My mom always had the house. She was only staying with her friend because her friend had been in a bad relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and it was an abusive one. So she was scared to be alone. So we
Okay.
weren't, we were just staying with her to
Okay.
keep her company, make sure that she was safe. And that
Okay.
was for about,
And who was living in the house that you eventually were living in when Mark disappeared?
that was my mom's house. That was the
And
house on Emma.
all right. And who was living in there while your mother was over with her friend?
Nobody. I mean, we were just staying over there. The
Okay.
house was fine. The house was fine. There wasn't any animals to feed or anything like that. So, I mean, maybe my mom stopped by there periodically to check on things, but we literally just stayed there for like a month.
Okay. Just a month. And how long then did you move back into the house that already existed that was empty? You go back in there after your mother's friend got over this. How long were you in there before Mark disappeared?
It wasn't much longer after. I would say, in my mind, it seems like maybe we were there a month, maybe less.
Okay.
You
And
know, I
do you know what happened to this other guy who was also living under that roof?
I do not. I do not. I just know that, you know, I can remember my mom talking with my brother, and just my mom wasn't a big fan of his and didn't really like the fact that my brother was getting close to him.
Huh.
He was older, and because he just had, I mean, I didn't think they were necessarily weird, but my mom just said it was just kind of weird for, you know, a younger, older man to be friending a 13-year-old, but, you know, and she didn't really want him, you know, spending any time with him. So it wouldn't be surprising to me. I don't know this for a fact. There's no proof to back it up, but it wouldn't surprise me if they still tried to continue to be friends
Right.
after we had left and just tried to keep it from my mom.
Okay. All right, that's possible. But you don't know, do you even remember, we're not going to get into his name, but do you even remember his name?
No, I don't remember his name. I just, you know, I told you about that TV program. I don't even remember completely what he looked like. I just remember he was skinny, had short hair, and, you know, I want to think maybe he was 19 or 20. And the picture of the video of that gentleman that they speak of that was in prison.
Yeah.
It just, whenever I see that, it makes me think maybe that was him, but I really don't remember his facial features that well. So,
Okay. What about being that he was living under the roof of your mother's friend? She had to know what his name was. Has anybody ever? Is she still alive? Anybody talked to her about any of this? About this guy, where he might have gone or anything?
I would have thought back then that there would have been conversations, but
Mm-hmm.
10-year-old boy, I wasn't really involved in those conversations. You know, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
did I know his friends, and did I know where his friends lived? And obviously, I didn't. There wasn't a lot of questions for me.
Okay. All right, we'll probably come back to that. So, on this disappearance date, all of you go to this adventure land except for Mark. Do you even do you have any idea what he might have done that day while all of you were gone? Has it ever come up in the last 36 years that anybody ever came forward and said, "Oh yeah, I was over at Mark's house that day"? Anything like that? Do we know his actions that day?
Not knowledge, no.
None. Okay. All right, so then you come home, and shortly after that, Mark says that he's going to go to a friend's house, and it seems to me that the who this friend was, but it was supposed to be on another street. Did he actually name what street at the time?
Yeah, it was McKinley, which was literally like 2 blocks from where we lived. So
Mm-hmm.
he would have walked east down our street to Southwest 9th, and then from there he would have walked from north to south to McKinley, and then from McKinley he would have walked west.
Okay. All right. And we'll get back to that as well. So of course, he doesn't, of course, he leaves.
Mm.
I'm not sure what time everybody thought that he would be getting back, being that he was already leaving at like 8:30 in the evening. But when did your family, once again, I realize you're 10 years old, but your mother, whoever else, when did they start getting a little worried that something didn't seem right here?
Well, I believe, my mom and my stepdad had gone to bed kind of early, not really thinking about anything, and then when she woke up the next morning and he wasn't there, then she got to be worried. But then she
Mhm.
also had thought that, perhaps he just walked over to our grandma's, because our grandma was only like, 2 miles away. And back then there was nothing for kids to walk everywhere. But then when we got there and he wasn't there, then she really started getting worried.
Okay. And once again, I realize probably you being 10 years old that the adults probably shielded a lot from you. But what have you learned since then from anybody, from the police, from your mother, from anybody who was maybe an adult or was in a position to know at the time, what they did that Sunday, that Monday, were their searches done? What have you learned about all of that?
To my knowledge, really nothing has been done. I know that my mom called and reported him missing, and they didn't do anything about it initially. They just said, well, he's got to be missing for 72 hours in order for it to be considered a missing person. So I'm sure that, once that had come to be, she called again. I remember there was I remember there was an article in the paper, maybe a week later, talking about it. But to my knowledge, there was never anything on the news. Excuse me, there was nothing. Um, I mean, a few years prior, when Johnny Gosh went missing, he was like literally one of the first boys to be put on the back of a milk carton.
Yep.
Because A&E is big here in Iowa. They had the big, manufacturing place there, and but that was never the case for my brother. And my mom I just remember her always being mad and complaining about the police, and they weren't doing anything, they weren't taking anything serious. They weren't going to do any kind of searches. The TV stations wouldn't talk to my mom, so there was really like no support to try and spread anything. She did talk to like the newspaper, and that's why there was a newspaper article, but that was it. Nobody else would listen.
Okay. Now, to be clear, I know that I'm sure many people in the lead up to this episode, because of course before they see us or hear us, I will have posted links to, of course, the Charlie Project, NAMUS, everywhere else where Marc's disappearance has been documented. But there's something we really need to be clear on. When he was leaving that night, of course, this is Saturday night, the day before Easter, he never really said where he was going. He never said, I was going to Jane Doe's house or John Smith's house. The way it's been explained to you is he just said, I'm going to a friend's, and this friend lives over on McKinley Street.
I mean, that's the only thing I recall. I mean, he might have given my specific name, but I don't remember that.
Okay.
But again,
please.
I was just saying back then it wasn't a big thing. Just, I'm just going to go see one of my friends and okay, see you in a little bit. Again, there wasn't a lot of questioning because there weren't issues like this shit.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't pretend to know what would go through a parent's mind back then because my mind's always went back to this. And that's why my kids were never allowed to walk anywhere, not to school, not around the block by themselves.
Okay.
Because I've experienced
it. I have to ask, Chris, is your mother still alive?
She is, but she's not all there anymore.
Okay. All right. But so I have to ask, in the years since, has she ever told you, once again, if you feel comfortable saying, I realize these would be private conversations between you and your mother. Has she ever said to you, I thought when Marc left that night or that evening to go over to a friend's house, quote unquote, did she ever say, I thought he was going to John Smith's house? Did she ever any idea of who that friend would have been in her mind of where he was going?
We never really had any conversations about it. Okay. She never, it was just kind of a subject that I wouldn't say avoided, but didn't bring it up. And, it was always so short and brief.
Okay.
As far as, so, yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that at the time in 1986, once again, understanding that you were 10 years old, do you believe that she was able to give the police any idea of, at least when they got involved after so many days, and we know how police like to blow these things off, but do you know if she ever gave any names to them at all?
Again, we didn't really talk about it much, so no, I don't know what name she would have given them.
Okay.
If any.
Okay, very, very good. So in the process of when it finally did start, kind of ramping up after these 3 days in which the police didn't want to do anything, which is common even to this day. Of course, we didn't have Amber Alerts back at the time. That wasn't really until the 1990s. And do you know if have you ever heard of any neighbors or any drivers, passerbys ever seeing, any I should say sightings, eyewitnesses of Marc walking anywhere that night? Of course, it's dark, so it's going to be a lot less likely. But any news that you've ever heard over the years about anybody actually seeing him walking that night?
No, nobody's ever come forth with any information.
Okay. All right. Now, let's move on to this. And of course, so we have this situation. You guys get home. We're not sure what, Mark did that day. Very well, to just theorize a little bit, very well could be that he had plans that he told a friend of his, hey, as soon as my sibling, as soon as Chris gets home and my mother gets home, I'll go over to your house just so I can tell them where I'm going. He might have had some plans made up earlier in the day while you were gone. Certainly possible, or it could be something else. But let's move on to this, being that you mentioned it already. Of course, Johnny Gosch, who went missing in 1982 in Des Moines, and also in 1984, Eugene Martin. So, of course, Mark's disappearance is 1986. To your knowledge, and we're not going to get into all the specifics of their disappearances, although we might do a little comparing and contrasting. Over the years, to your knowledge, any connections ever made between these two boys who are still missing and Mark's, to your knowledge? Any connections at all?
Nothing factual, anyways.
Okay. All right. But I understand that Eugene, although Johnny Gosch's disappearance, although it's technically the Des Moines area, not very near to your house, whereas Eugene Martin seemingly went missing close to your house. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, in the same block area.
Wow. And did your family know about his going missing 2 years before that? Do you have any ideas?
No, I mean, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about Johnny Gosch. I didn't watch the news regularly, but the Eugene Gosch, from everything that I've watched and looked at, was treated the same way my brother's was. They wouldn't report, they wouldn't allow it to be considered a missing persons. A running away is what they
Right.
always said.
Right.
That's what the police Johnny Gosch too. I mean, it was Noreen Gosch that got all the coverage and everything. It was her, putting all that together. Otherwise, her situation would have been no different from ours.
Okay. Now, in talking to you, though, there could be two possible connections between three of all of them. I wouldn't say it's scientific, but I understand. Of course, Johnny and Eugene, if anybody were to look them up, they went missing both when they were supposed to be doing their paper routes earlier in the morning. Did Mark ever have a paper route?
Yeah, he did.
He did. Did he have it at the time of his disappearance, or was this something like a year or two prior? Do you even know?
He had it when he disappeared.
He did. Okay, but we should be clear, he did not go missing during his paper route.
Correct.
Okay. Now, I also understand, though, that both of them were involved in Boy Scouts. Was Mark involved in the Boy Scouts?
Yes, he was.
And was he involved in that at the time of his disappearance?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So maybe there is something there, not, once again, not scientific. Of course, a lot of boys, at least at the time in the 1980s, were involved in newspaper routes. I was not, but I lived kind of out in the country where that really wasn't a thing. But certainly in a town like Des Moines, that might be something, that connects all of them, or it's just a coincidence. Regarding being that Eugene Martin seemingly went missing close to where you lived at the time and where Mark was last seen, any connection? Did they go to the same school? Do you know anything about that?
I didn't know anything about Eugene Martin until years later. It wasn't until when you started seeing that there was actual, news coverings of the three boys. And that wasn't until I was well done with school that I started learning the other boys prior to my brother. Okay. So, no. Didn't even know him. Didn't even know he was missing.
Right. Okay. Now that you do know about it, was he close? Did he live close enough that Mark and Eugene would have maybe gone to the same school? Do you even know?
I mean, it would make sense if he actually lived versus what paper route he had, because I had a paper route too. Not long after all this, and they wouldn't always necessarily give you a route that was like right in your neighborhood. you would sometimes have to drive, with your parents a few miles.
Right.
Right. A lot of
I
parents,
guess,
kids, and
right. I guess what I'm trying to do here is that being that we have these boys who are all still missing, it is an odd occurrence. It's somewhat rare. It's all in the same city, a couple years separating them. Just trying to find some connections here while I'm doing this interview, to try to narrow it down. Are they all connected? Is there some connection between them? Or is this all just some, horrible coincidence that this all happened in the Des Moines in the 1980s? It seems to me they do have some connections, given the newspaper route, given that they were in Boy Scouts, maybe that might lead somewhere. Just going back to Mark's trip that day. So he would have been walking. How long would this walk have been? How long going over to McKinley Street?
10, maybe 15 minutes to go, to go down our street, to go over a couple streets, and then to come up a street. Yeah, 10, 15 minutes. Okay. And it wasn't uncommon for us boys back then to just cut through people's yards. So, I mean, if he did that, he literally could have been there in like 5 minutes.
Right. Right. And to your knowledge, being that he said he was going over to a friend's house, to your knowledge, once again, I'm going to keep saying this just to remind all the listeners that you were only 10 at the time. You're not responsible for your brother. Do you know if any of the parents, anybody over on McKinley Street, ever called your house saying, hey, we thought that Mark was supposed to be coming over this evening, but he never made it? Any calls like that ever happen?
No, but again, back in that day, we didn't have internet. We just had regular telephones at the house. Mm-hmm. So there was no, no way of being able to get it out there other than the television, which again, there was no coverage done on my brother, not until, years later. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't even have known that he was gone or that, he was missing.
I know that I'm being very technical with this. I just want to make sure I understand it and the audience understands it. He says he was going to a friend's house, but that friend never called when Mark didn't show up.
I don't know. I wasn't home. I spent the night at a friend's house. There's a lot of details from that time that it doesn't get privileged information about. So, that I've told you is the extent of what I know from back then. It's just... many years later and after losing my own son, I guess it's got a lot to do with why I just want to find out what happened to him, whether he was taken or whatever it is. I just want to know. I want closure. I'd like to be able to get it before my mom passes away someday. But
okay, let's move on to this now. Being that, of course, Noreen Gosch has Johnny Gosch's mother has been a forefront, and I'm not trying to draw attention away, but if we're to believe that all of these three are connected, and I'm certainly open to the idea of that, she has told a couple different stories over the years. She hasn't changed stories, but a couple significant stories that she's told since her son went missing in 1982. Are you aware of the story in which she claimed that Johnny came to visit her with a guy or a couple different guys, in which Johnny claimed that he had been, taken away and he's not allowed to leave this group? Are you aware of that story?
Yeah, it was just one guy. It wasn't a multitude.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the same situation as he was. Yeah, she would have no reason to lie about that. So, nothing to gain.
Yeah. Have you ever, if you can say, I'm not saying you have to, have you ever spoken to Johnny's mother about this one-on-one?
About her seeing him? No.
Yeah. Yes.
No, never spoke to her directly about that.
Okay. And you're also, but that's nothing that has happened like that for Mark's, where there's any belief that Mark appeared as an adult somewhere and visited anybody?
Not to my knowledge, that I've ever learned.
Okay. And there's also this other story. Once again, maybe you're aware of it, but the listeners might not be, given that these are all might be connected. That there was that Johnny's mother came across this dollar bill that said, "I am alive," and then it was written in cursive signature like Johnny Gosch you're aware of that story as well?
I am.
Okay. And never talked to her about that either?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Over the last 36 years, whoops. Over the last 36 years, and a lot of times, and I'll give an example so you and the listeners know what I'm talking about, especially when it comes to children who probably were abducted. A lot of adult names come out. For example, Jacob Wetterling, it's not a disappearance I've covered, but I know a lot about it since it's solved now, that over the years, there were multiple names made, broadcast to the public. This person might have done it. This person might have done it. Jacob Wetterling, very much like Mark, very much like Johnny, very much like Eugene, who went missing. But have any names ever been mentioned regarding that have made public or you've heard regarding Mark's disappearance or any of those other disappearances? Any, suspects, I guess we might call them?
No.
None.
Nothing's ever been covered. But again, there's never been any investigation done.
Mm-hmm.
It's ever been done.
Okay.
Please.
Chris, have you ever tried to file what they call a Freedom of Information Act request with the police? Have you ever tried to get all the paperwork?
I have not.
Okay. It's probably something, we can talk about this after we're done. It's something probably that might be worth doing because if you'd like to get the paperwork and see what was done in 1986 and everything forward, here's something that I've learned, and the listeners know this, is that I covered the disappearance of a girl who went missing in Marathon, Florida in 1993. Her name is Jennifer Perry. Marathon, Florida is down near Key West, so it's not on the mainland. It's out there on Route 1 going out toward Key West. She went missing 29 years ago. Unfortunately, she is still missing. But her family at the time thought in 1993 that the police didn't do anything, and they hadn't done anything. I ended up filing that request, and I ended up getting 240 pages of work that the police did. Now, unfortunately, she's still missing. I have an idea of what happened, but it turned out that the police just weren't talking about the work that they had been doing for years and years and years. So this might be something that you might want to think about doing. You just can't get the paperwork from the police. There's a certain way you have to go through all of this, and I'll talk to you about that after we're done here. But it's just something to keep in mind. Just because the police don't look like they're not doing anything doesn't mean they aren't doing anything. You've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but after, of course, you're 10 years old, you're still in the same neighborhood. Mark is missing. How did this affect your childhood after that?
Honestly, other than creating problems, I just had a lot of, behavioral issues. Some that were already done before that, and this was just kind of like the icing on the cake. I was just really defiant and really I didn't have any respect for authority. So that would be the biggest impact it had on my life.
Mm-hmm. How did of course, you've talked about your mother, and my perception is that you and your mother really have not talked about this a lot over the years. Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And would you say that after Mark went missing, that she was much more protective of you? There was no more going out, at 8 o'clock at night after it was dark, things like that. Would you say things changed or what?
It wasn't too many years after that we ended up moving to a different spot, but she kind of regressed, maybe. She just she had a lot of difficulty dealing with the scenario, and she just probably didn't deal with it in the most positive way. So,
Mm-hmm.
You would think that one would, be more protective
Right.
of their other kids, but I think it was just too much for her to deal with.
Okay.
She never recovered.
Okay. What about your sister who was 16? You said you were separated by 3 years. What about her?
She ended up moving out of state
She did.
not long after that, and getting married not long after that. So I didn't see her after that either.
Mm-hmm. How did this disappearance of Marc affect her?
The few times we talked about it, she just, couldn't believe that it happened. And it just seemed like it was just like one of those things where people just didn't want to really deal with it or talk about it, or,
Mm-hmm.
it just, maybe that was because my mom didn't talk about it very much, but, yeah, it just didn't get talked about. I can
Okay.
remember having conversations with my sister about it, but, you know, um, she didn't have any more knowledge than what I did,
Mm-hmm.
because she would literally spend most of her time with her dad in Colfax, and maybe would come down, every other week or every other weekend or something. She was going to school, so it wasn't like we'd see her all the time.
Right.
She and my brother weren't as close. I mean, I was close to my sister, I was close to my brother, but they weren't really that close.
Oh, okay. All right. So I guess what we're also saying is, of course, 16, you're going to maybe be a lot more aware of the world than you would have been at 10. But even she could not really pinpoint who Marc was going to see that evening because the two of them weren't that close.
Right, and she wasn't even there.
She wasn't
She
even
didn't.
right.
She didn't know his friends, and I mean, heck, I don't even remember. I don't even know my sister's friends. I didn't know his friends that well. We just, I don't know, we just didn't.
Okay. Did any of Marc's friends later, not maybe when you were 10, but 13, 14, 15, 16, ever come to you and, or even maybe as you became an adult and said, here's what I think happened, or here's where I think Marc was going that evening? Any of them ever come forward, even just to say, we're really sorry that it happened? Anything like that?
Just to say sorry it happened, or maybe I'd be amongst some friends, because I had friends who had older siblings that were friends with my brother,
Hmm.
and hanging out with them, and periodically somebody be like, "Hey, you guys ever find your brother? You ever figure out what happened?" No, we never did, and it was like, that sucks. And that would be about the extent of the conversation.
Okay.
No came forth was like, this happened or that happened. It was just always, the same response, like, that's crazy. It's just so crazy to believe that happened.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And we still have no idea what friend lived on McKinley Street.
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. How does this affect you as an adult, as a parent? Now, I know that you are a parent. How has this affected your parenting style? Like I said, I know you have at least two children. How has
Mm-hmm.
this affected you? And knowing that your brother walked off, never came back. Do you think this has affected you as a parent?
Oh, it definitely has affected me. My oldest is 20 now, and my youngest is 13. But my kids were never allowed to walk to school. They were never allowed to ride their bikes to school. They were never allowed to even walk around the neighborhood unless they had a friend with them. I talked to them at young ages about what to do if somebody ever approached them. If somebody starts asking you to help them, find a dog, or they try to lure you with some candies or something like that. I said, you just start screaming. You start screaming and you run away.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it's just, I was always afraid. That was my biggest fear growing up, is that one of my kids would get taken, and they weren't even allowed to play in the front yard. They had to
Wow.
be in the back, unless there was a couple people, they were riding bikes or something. But yeah, other than that, they were in the backyard, or we took them to their friend's house, or we picked up their friends, or if they wanted to go somewhere, we took them.
Mhm. Okay. Do
Yeah,
you have
and I
a?
made sure they could back. So
Please say that again, please.
I said that I always made sure they always knew what could potentially happen to them, and I let them know that if that ever happened, chances are we'd never find you again. Because 9 times out of 10, you're taken, it's already over. You know,
Right.
so they were afraid. They were afraid to. I wouldn't say I wanted to scare the death out of them, but I didn't want to be naive and think that it couldn't happen to them, because that's what a lot of kids think.
Right. Okay. Do you have a Facebook page or website set up for Marc's disappearance? If so, why don't you tell the listeners and viewers about it right now?
No, I don't have a Facebook set up for him.
Okay.
I have, but I don't have one for my brother.
Okay. You might want to think about doing that. Certainly raise the profile of it. I know it's a little more work, and you never know what kind of people are going to get on there. Sometimes you get some trolls and things, but it's certainly, in addition to now this going to be made public, doing this interview, on YouTube and everywhere else, that certainly would raise the profile and get some people talking, especially if you can concentrate on making sure that people in the Des Moines area, can remind all of them that Marc Allen is still missing. So it's something to think about. Totally your choice, but I would say 90% of the disappearances that I cover usually have some Facebook page or group attached to it. Just something to think about.
Well, I've reached out to a bunch of different missing person pages.
Mm-hmm.
And typically I become a member of the groups that have large following.
Yeah.
And friend requests, and then I've shared his story on there, copied a link from the cold case file and from the different news articles, and even the movie Who Took Johnny, posting those. A lot of people saw that movie back when it came out, and don't even remember Mom was in that. So
right.
So yeah, that's how I came across you. That's how
it is, of course. Great. Okay. Chris, any final words before we complete this interview?
Just that I appreciate you trying to help and spread the word, and I'm open to any thoughts and ideas that like you mentioned that about the go to the police and getting that. I don't have knowledge, so it's very appreciative when suggestions like that are made. So yeah, I'm just grateful for any and all help that I'm getting.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And that was my October 15th, 2022 interview with Chris Allen, younger brother of Marc Allen. I thank him for appearing on both audio and video for this episode. I did a supplemental map analysis video for Marc's disappearance. I show you where he lived at the time, along with where McKinley Street is. I also show where Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin were when they disappeared. Speaking of Johnny and Eugene, this is where I will start my summation. I'm going to read at least partially the pages for both on my friend Megan Linus' website, charleyproject.org, so we can start to compare and contrast their disappearances to Marc's. But please, if you'd like, go to their pages to read the entire biographies for Johnny and Eugene. Johnny's first. John was last seen while conducting his newspaper route in West Des Moines, Iowa on September 5th, 1982. He was accompanied by his dachshund Gretchen. His father normally accompanied John on his route. The day before his disappearance, John asked to be allowed to do his route alone, but his parents wouldn't allow it. He apparently got up at 5:45 a.m. and left the house without waking his father as he was supposed to do. Witnesses told authorities that John was seen speaking to a male suspect on 42nd Street and Marquardt Lane while delivering his newspapers. The man was driving a blue two-tone Ford Fairmont, and John was apparently giving him directions. At 7 a.m., customers on John's route called his home, saying their newspapers hadn't been delivered. His parents thought John might have overslept, but when they checked his room, they realized he was gone. Gretchen returned to the family's residence, but John had vanished. His wagon, with the papers still inside, was found 2 blocks from his home. Now, Eugene's. Eugene was last seen between 5:30 and 6 a.m. on August 12, 1984, in his hometown of Des Moines, Iowa. He was preparing to start delivering his morning newspaper route at the time. He normally delivered the papers with his older stepbrother, but his stepbrother was not with him that day.
Witnesses saw Eugene talking to a man between 5 and 5:15 a.m. at Southwest 12th Street and Highview Drive. The man is described as clean-cut, and he appeared to be in his 30s. He's never been identified. They were reportedly engaged in friendly conversation. Eugene's route manager called his family at 7:15 a.m. to report that Eugene's newspaper sack had not been retrieved from the corner of Southwest 14th and Highview Streets. The manager called the family back 15 minutes later around 7:30 a.m. and reported that the papers were still unclaimed. Eugene's father then called the authorities. Eugene has not been seen or heard from again. And that concludes the biographies. At least for the actual facts of the days of their disappearances and the demographics, Johnny's and Eugene's are very similar. In fact, I really don't know how realistically they could be more similar. The problem, that does not mean they are connected. It very well could be that Eugene's was actually a copycat of Johnny's from 2 years before, done by someone who didn't even know Johnny or his kidnapper. There are no facts to rule this out. There's another problem, and it would seem to be a bigger one. What transpired after these two boys went missing has been vastly different. For Eugene, basically nothing. No sightings, no persons of interest, no rumors. In fact, as far as I can tell, Eugene's case has been cold since the day he disappeared. But for Johnny, it's been the exact opposite. In 1985, a dollar bill found in Sioux City, Iowa had the words, "I am alive" on it, and the message was signed Johnny Gosch. Analysts determined that this was Johnny's signature. In 1989, John Benacki, a man with a multiple personality disorder and a history of sexually assaulting children, claimed he had been part of the pedophile ring that kidnapped Johnny. And Benacki seemingly had information that only someone who had actually met Johnny would know, at least according to Johnny's mother. Then in 1997, Johnny's mother claimed Johnny came to see her. He was with another man, and they spoke for over an hour. Johnny said he had been abducted into a pedophile ring, but had escaped and was now in hiding. And I could go on. So although Eugene's and Johnny's disappearances are factually similar, everything that happened after is completely different. In fact, and now to bring Marc into the summation, what I'm saying is although Eugene's is like Johnny's in regards to the circumstances, and Marc's seems to be the odd one out, in regards to the aftermaths, Eugene's and Marc's are very similar, with really nothing going on, and Johnny's is the odd one out. More to the point, if these three are really connected, and if we are to believe Noreen Gosch, Johnny's mother, then why haven't Eugene and Marc gone to see their mothers? Why was Johnny able to find a way to write his name on a dollar bill, but Eugene and Marc were not? Why did this Benacki guy see Johnny, but not Eugene and Marc? Hard to understand. Ultimately, this brings us back to Marc Allen, the missing boy for this episode. Yes, he was in Boy Scouts and newspaper delivery, just like Eugene and Johnny. But then, if Marc was abducted by the same person who took the other two, why didn't that kidnapper get Marc while he was delivering papers, like what seemed to have happened with Eugene and Johnny? Likewise, if Marc's disappearance is instead connected to him being a Boy Scout like Eugene and Johnny, would not have this been pretty easy to solve back in the 1980s? You would think. But what also stumps me is many times in disappearances like this involving children, suspects' names are often made public when the police are investigating. For example, Jacob Wetterling's case, or Kyron Horman, Madeline McCann. But for Johnny, Eugene, and Marc, there's been nothing. Not one person who is seen as a person of interest has ever been officially named. And no, to be honest, I really don't think John Benacki qualifies. Strange indeed. Maybe more than anything, this is what makes these boys three of a kind. I'll leave the theorizing up to you.
And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.